This podcast is made possible by NetSuite by Oracle.
Hello, this is Samir Alhan, CFO of the Commerce Company, and you're listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 803.
The reality is that employees are looking for a place where their talents and contributions are valued and where they can grow. You have to provide both of those, and you have to provide a competitive wage. And I think it's the combination of all three that are the balance. Clearly, wages are important, but I think they're a threshold consideration. The other two are very important. Am I working with a manager who cares about me and wants me to develop? And do I have opportunities to develop and grow within the company? If you cannot answer those questions increasingly for people entering the workforce, you're simply not going to keep them. You're not going to get them candidly in the first place.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's episode, we speak to Efrain Rivera, CFO of Paychex. Back in April of 2020, as COVID's arrival in the U.S. left financial markets reeling, Paychex CFO Efrain Rivera confronted the temptation to say nothing. As the company's quarterly earnings call approached, Rivera tells us Paychex executives gathered in a conference room to debate the idea of halting any future guidance. After all, the future was just so uncertain. The problem was, we did have the data, explains Rivera, referring to Paychex's unique lines of sight into the payroll practices of thousands of middle-market businesses. The earnings call that followed was unusual because of its length, 2 hours, and because of the questions that were being posed to Paychex management. CFO Efrain Rivera tells us what was shared and why it mattered. We begin after this. This is it, the putt to win the tournament. If you sink it, the championship is yours. But on your backswing, your hat falls over your eyes. Is this how you're running your business? Poor visibility, because you're still relying on spreadsheets and outdated finance software. To see the full picture, you need to upgrade to NetSuite by Oracle. Over 28,000 businesses already use NetSuite. For the new year, NetSuite has a new financing program for those ready to upgrade at netsuite.com/CFOpod. Head to netsuite.com/CFOpod for this special one-of-a-kind financing offer on the #1 financial system for growing businesses. netsuite.com/CFOpod. Hello, we're speaking with Efrain Rivera, CFO of Paychex. Efrain, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be with you here, Jack.
Well, we've been looking forward to this, Efrain. You have a very interesting background looking back over time. We always begin with this question, and it'll be fun to hear what you'd like to share with us.
Yeah.
You're going to have to cherry pick. It's been a long career, but just a few items that you feel really helped you become a CFO and do this job as a finance leader.
Yeah.
What would come to mind for you?
Yeah, so it's a great question. If you look at my background, I actually practiced law for a while and then started a career that culminated at being the CFO at 2 publicly held companies. I would say the first thing is that my legal training helped me. So long before I started to embark on a career in corporate finance, I trained as a lawyer and actually practiced as a lawyer. I worked for the Department of Justice for a number of years, and during that process, really honed the analytical skills that served me in my work as a CFO. I'd say the first thing, obviously, then pursuing advanced degrees in finance and eventually also a DBA helped too. But I would say that analytical bent that I acquired being a lawyer, and then that I honed when I went to business school and majored in finance, really were the two things that got me in the area where I could really use the skills that would propel me to be a financial executive. So I'd say one other thing on that. I've always thought that because of the diversity of my background, I approach finance from the standpoint of management. If you understand the business well, you'll understand the finances of the business if you have the training. And if you understand the finances of the business, you will understand how to influence decisions to maximize and to optimize the value that a business brings to the market. That's been my approach since I started, and it served me well.
Well, I have to say, you had a long tenure at Bausch and Lomb, where you built your career for more than 2 decades. You went into the CFO office roughly around 2007 there after
Yep.
an 18-year climb.
Yep.
And during that time, you were presidents of different units. You had all sorts of titles, operational as well as finance. Can you give us a flavor of, the type of executive you were
Yeah.
there?
Yeah. So I would say that I was typical of something that happened much later in corporate America, which was CFOs that got a combination of both operating experience and also financial experience. So if you look at what led me to become a CFO, about half of my experiences were in general management. I managed, as you said, operations outside of the US and eventually managed a region outside of the US, then came back into finance as a divisional controller, one of the largest divisions within the company. And then I went back into general management, and at a point in time was offered the opportunity to continue my career there. But based on the experiences that I'd had in up to that point, I realized that I do best in a senior financial role, and partly because I understood the business very well, and I understood how the finances related to the business, and it put me in a unique position. There weren't too many people who had the combination of both operating experience and financial experience that I had, and that really helped me quite a bit. So yes, I had a blast in terms of managing primarily in Latin America, but outside of Latin America also, and in a complicated region where there were lots of issues that were coming at you. And I learned to hone the skills of managing through problems and getting to a conclusion, and that served me very well when I eventually got into the CFO role.
I just want to. I actually have I don't do this very often. I actually found the press release online of you getting appointed CFO at Bausch and Lomb, and just as you were just sharing, it says Rivera has served as general manager of Bausch and Lomb Mexico, vice president in finance for global vision care, and president of Bausch and Lomb Canada and Latin America. He was elected an officer of the company in 2002. Anyway, it lists the variety of different, and it mentions your prior to joining Bausch and Lomb, he served as an attorney in the civil division of the U.S. Justice Department. So it does hit the resume. But
Yeah.
what struck me, I was like, well, when you first joined Bausch and Lomb, what is and again, one of the things you did, you got an MBA, I know in the late 80s, before I think you joined Bausch and
Yeah.
Lomb. So you have your law degree, you get your MBA, and then you join. What are you doing exactly when you first step foot in the company? Yeah.
So that's a great question. I had a unique role within the company where I would evaluate structures and transactions in the Treasury area to determine whether there were projects that would permit us to use the capital structure of the company in a way that would create value for shareholders. And it sounds pretty broad, but I remember my boss at one point said to me, Efrain, your job is to figure out what the best minds on Wall Street are working on from a capital structure perspective and an investment perspective, and bring it to me before it hits the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And so I interacted with lots of investment professionals. A lot of those issues related to both the intersection of finance and the law. And my background was perfectly suited for those ideas. I would say I presented probably 8 to 10 major ideas to management. I think I batted about 20% on it, but that was part of the job that I was asked to do. And from there, had more senior positions in finance and eventually general management, and then back into finance. So I was really fortunate that I had a boss that believed in me and saw the potential I could bring to the role. Back then, there weren't that many JD MBAs. It's much more common now in the CFO suite. And I brought a skill set that other people simply didn't have. And I learned from my colleagues too. So it was a great experience and a great proving ground for the things that would come later. I would say one other thing. I just learned to deal with gnarly problems and gnarly situations. And I had I was energized by them, and I also had a certain ability to work through them in a systematic way to get to a conclusion that worked.
Now, this is a brand, Bausch& Lomb, so many consumers know well, but I feel like we don't know the company all that well. During that time, I imagine there was a lot of growth, but did it grow through acquisition, or how did Bausch& Lomb grow?
Yeah, so during that time, my career there, it really had two periods. The first, the company was very focused on consumer goods. So many people will know some iconic brands that are still around. For example, like Ray-Ban. So we had the Ray-Ban sunglass business, and that did very well. Certainly in the early '90s, early to mid '90s. We eventually sold that business, and then decided to focus on being a much more focused life sciences business. So we sold the Ray-Ban business and then eventually invested in surgical instrumentation. The surgical business became more important, and everything relating to the eyes from a life sciences perspective, contact lenses, intraocular lenses, and that went well. And that was the second phase of my experience there until eventually the business was sold to private equity. So I like to think that experience really helped me to understand how businesses go through transformation processes. And in that case, part of the business that was consumer goods got sold off, and we transformed into more of a life sciences business. And I saw the challenges and the opportunities in those kinds of transformational efforts.
You mentioned earlier you referred to a boss. Was that a finance executive? Were you reporting up the finance function from your earliest time there then? Okay.
Yes.
So
I'm sorry.
when did you the thought I had was, well, when did he start thinking I could be a CFO, or thinking that that was aspirational for you? When did that happen?
Yeah, so two things. In answer to your first question, yes, I reported into the treasurer directly. He saw things in me that, frankly, at the time, I'm not sure I saw in myself. So I was starting in my business career. He saw that I had potential to go beyond, far beyond where I was. I remember when I replaced him later in my career, became the treasurer first and eventually a CFO. And he was really, really gracious. And he said, from the moment I met Efrain, I had a sense that he would go places. So that was the first part. But I would say, Jack, one other thing that's important. You can't get into the C-suite without people investing in you. So you need a hand up. That typically is the way it happens. It especially happens for minority executives. That's you need people to help you. And I remember a very kind CFO who said to me, Efrain, if you're going to get where you want to get, where you can get, which is, I think, to be a senior leader of finance in this organization, there's a certain set of things that you need to tick off on your list. You need to check the box, for example, on internal audit within the company, and you need to do a stint. You don't have to do it, but that's up to you whether you want to do it. And I recognize, well, if the CFO is telling you there are things that you need to do, then you really need to take them seriously. And then essentially, early on in my career, I did a stint through internal audit that was really helpful in building my career. So, two things. One, a caring, thoughtful boss who wanted to see you succeed. And then the second, a CFO who was in the role, who saw again in me things that I probably didn't see at the time, but was more concrete in the sense that he said, "Here's the checklist you need to go through. Here's a set of experiences that will put you where you want to be." And I had to decide, do I want to do that or don't? I chose it. I'm glad I did. I'm glad that he reached out, and I was very fortunate to have those two people connected to me.
What is also interesting when you first began telling us about Bosch and Loam, it was the treasury sort of function that you were attached to, and even
Yeah.
today I see that you're CFO and treasurer at Paychex. And I only mention that because treasury sometimes is a place where CFOs might get sort of delayed, or they find it hard to get back
Yeah.
into the mainstream function. But not for you. It seems in some ways you distinguished yourselves there. How am I doing?
Yes, I think that's a fair comment, and I think a lot of treasurers wonder, how do I get into the CFO role from the Treasury role? The first thing I would say is you have to get some operational experience because Treasury is quite detailed. I think, is just a fantastic area within companies, but it is a relatively specialized area. And in the CFO role, as you build out your career and as you build out your experience, you need to be very broad. You can't just be a very good technical specialist. You have to have a breadth of experience that permits you, when you're in a meeting, to speak to a number of issues that aren't necessarily just financial, aren't necessarily just about treasury. Those are important issues, but you need to be able to speak to the full gamut of the business experience that the company is going through. That's what makes you a valued advisor. That's what you're looking to build the chops and the muscle in order to be successful in the role. So I would say to people who are in that role, it's really important to broaden it by getting more operational experience, because as you go up the ladder, that becomes very, very important.
Well, I've already recounted some of the investment of career years at Bosch and Loam. I just want to, before we ask you about Paychex, I just want to point out that it was total 21 years, as we mentioned, 18-year climb to the CFO office, and now at Paychex, you've already logged 11 years. Again, these are long tenures for finance people today, and interesting. There might be another question or two we'll have to ask you about that regarding your career, why you stayed. You obviously could have been recruited elsewhere, but you stayed. I always like asking that. But first, let's find out about Paychex. And again, you arrived there in 2011. I think you arrive as the CFO. But tell us about this company first of all. For those who might not know, it is I think it's over $4 billion in revenue today. It's publicly traded. It's a big company. But tell us about Paychex. What exactly distinguishes it in the marketplace today?
Yeah, so Paychex is the preeminent human capital management provider for small, that focuses on small and medium-sized businesses. There's other people in the market. They service parts of that market, but we focus on small and medium-sized businesses. We've been around for over 50 years. When I joined the company, we were approximately $2 billion in revenue. Today, we're close to $4.5 billion. Our market cap was between 10 and 11 billion. Today, we're between 45 and 50 billion, depending on the day. And Paychex does a lot of outsourcing for small and medium-sized businesses. We focus on HR. We focus on, as I mentioned, human capital management, retirement services, a variety of the kinds of outsourced services that small and medium-sized growing businesses are going to want. We pay 1 in 12 workers in the economy, a pretty amazing stat. And in addition to the largest player, we're the second largest player in the space, and highly, highly profitable business, and a long track record of growth since its founding in the 1970s. It's really an amazing story, and I work with a great group of colleagues that have taken the business from where it was when I joined it to where we are today.
It's just a very interesting place to be at the moment when you think of all these small to mid-sized firms that your software helps run, and the fact that talent is such a closely watched area for all those companies. There's likely a lead finance person very concerned about how they're compensating their people today and whether the benefits are the right mix for their companies. As your software expands and seeks to help those companies manage their talent, pay their people, is the functionality of the product expanding? Are you enhancing the product?
So the first thing is we are a software as a service platform, SaaS platform, as you mentioned. When the company started, it was basic payroll. But increasingly, I'd say over the last 5 to 7 years, we really are an integrated human capital management provider. And I would say our suite of HR services, HR outsourcing services, is really the leading suite of services in the market. We serve almost or around 2 million worksite employees through our solutions. And it really is, in many respects, the force that is driving the company forward. So we have more than 600 outsourced HR specialists who help our clients deal with the gamut of HR issues that they will encounter during their business existence. And many of those HR advisors become very trusted advisors to those businesses. So I would say HR is first. I would say second, there's a need for greater retirement planning and retirement services, and we are the leading provider of retirement services administration in the country in terms of number of 401k plans. Over 100,000 clients. We do record keeping for them and help clients set up plans and administer them. And retirement services is increasingly important. And then, if you want to combine all of your back office services, benefits, HR, HCM services into one bundle, we've got that covered too, and that's another offering that we have. So really, as we've grown over the years, HR has been leading the way. That's increasingly an area where many businesses need help, especially small and medium-sized businesses.
I'm curious, the company that you joined 11 years ago, we know that, okay, for one thing, the cloud has taken over. And I don't know if your solution might have been more on premise and it's evolved into the SaaS model. But at the same time, it sounds like this outsourcing opportunity has also grown. So is it almost like you're CFO of a multiple different companies? If we went back 10 years, here's where the numbers that you were concerned about then. Very different business. How am I doing? Am I describing your world? And
yeah, I would say that the transformation has been dramatic. I would say the SaaS, the movement to the cloud had already started when I walked in the door, but I would say the transition to becoming more HR, HCM centric had not. So that's been a transformation. So if you look at our revenue back 10, 11 years ago, we were much more HCM and payroll dependent. Today, our business is much more HR and HCM driven. So lots of changes in terms of the composition of the revenue and also where we are growing the fastest. So that has changed pretty dramatically. And the other thing is that the quality, the suite of services that we provide on our platform, which is called Flex, which is a fully SaaS platform that's integrated with all of these modules that provide service to clients. That has grown by leaps and bounds over that 10-year period. We have a tremendous IT group that stays ahead of the curve in terms of technology. I would say 10 years ago, we were in a very different place than we are right now. If you do not have a state-of-the-art technology platform, you simply are not in this business anymore. And had we not done the investing that we had done, I think that due to strategic thinking from the CEO's office on down, we would be in a very different place. We certainly would not have quadrupled or more the price of the stock over that period.
Fran, part of what we asked during this portion of the interview is we look for ways that finance leaders are measuring their business in this age of data. Finance leaders will frequently tell us they have too much data, but we're wondering if there's a measure that you've begun to look at as you get the tools and this digital transformation actually becomes practical, where you can measure things perhaps that you haven't before. Customer, experience, customer habits are being measured more closely. I'm wondering if there's a non-financial metric that you might be able to share with us, something that you keep a close eye on that even 5 years ago, maybe you weren't paying attention to, but you are now. Anything?
Yeah, in addition to all of the things that you just mentioned on the financial side, I would say I've become more focused, certainly in the last year, at looking at interaction with our platform. What do I mean by that? We have a SaaS platform that is the one SaaS platform that is the way customers interact with us. Customers are free to use it in a variety of different ways, but looking at the data and understanding how they're interacting with the platform is really, really important to us, because it tells us what customers value in the feature set that's in the platform. I would say the dramatic change that's happened in the last 5 years is the amount of interaction that clients have with that platform and the ways in which they use it. And so now when you see what a client is doing, when you see how they are interacting with your platform, you can architect the platform to make it easier for them to interact and also to use all of the technologies that are available in the market, things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, in the back end, or something called robotic process automation. You can look at all of that, help you to become more effective in your interactions with clients and also more efficient on the back end. And so we look at a lot of those, I would say, non-financial data. They're really more operational and platform interaction data to help us inform both new uses for our platform, but also to improve the effectiveness of the engagement with the platform. If customers are engaged, we will win in the long term.
And you begin to get a sense of how to hold on to customers. You're beginning to see where customer churn happens, and why is it that people or customers who use the platform this way we held on to, but the ones that didn't, we lost. Why is that? I'm wondering who's around the table when you have that discussion, because what I think might have changed from this CFO tour of duty to your earlier one is you do have the data people involved, or the people who can really begin to show you who's interacting with your, I don't know, your FP&A people, or your, you tell me who's around the table helping you understand that this is significant and this isn't, but this must be. I mean, and I have to believe it's a collective discussion sometimes. No, or what would you tell us? Yeah.
Yeah, in our business, it's a combination of operations people who also, we have a lot of data analysis embedded in our operations group. Our product people who look at new products, they're also at the table. Our IT folks who are charged with, and our developers who are charged with building the platform. And then there's data analysts within IT, in addition to, by the way, other members of the management team, obviously the CEO, myself, and others. So you have a pretty robust discussion. In the past, you might have had a few IT folks there, maybe one or two operations folks. Now that conversation is much more widespread because it's not just about the technology. It's about how we run the business and how we add value for customers. And so understanding where a customer is looking, how they're using the platform, maybe where they're not happy or where they're getting hung up on a certain issue becomes really not a technical issue. It becomes a business issue that we collectively need to address and solve.
When something becomes a business issue, is there are you sharing a number that perhaps you hadn't shared, or maybe you were saying, we have to share this wider. We need people to understand this number is significant. So maybe we can put it on a dashboard, or maybe I can mention it during a meeting. I mean, how do you raise the profile of something like that? And I I don't know if you have something specific you can share with us, but I guess that's what we're looking for you as a finance leader, how you're trying to communicate certain non-financial, I would call it, but obviously they influence the finance. Yeah.
Yeah, I would point to one really shining example that we look at really commonly. So our platform is available on a number of devices, including mobile devices. And the way we architected the platform is that the look you get on your mobile device is the same look you're going to get when you use your PC or you use a tablet. So now what becomes interesting is the ability to measure those interactions with mobile devices and when people are logging on, what they're doing when they log on, and how many sessions are they having? What's the duration of the session? What are they looking at in a given part of the month, et cetera? So we look at number of users, number of unique users. We sound very much like a pretty typical technology company. And then how much is the duration of the engagement? If we get it right, we've got the right sweet spot in terms of number of interactions, number of engagements, how many people are actually using our mobile apps. All of those become important data points, and we want to see increasing growth in those numbers to understand that we're getting it right, that we're getting the right engagement, and that we're providing value for customers.
We want to touch on with you something that your offerings help other companies manage, middle-sized companies manage. You're a CFO of an enterprise company, quite a large company today. We want to talk to you about talent, and we want to understand better whether some of the recent headlines regarding the Great Resignation, talent churn has become a concern. Um, Wondering if there's something that's become an approach you've taken in the last year to help address this. If you're talking to your chief people officer more, perhaps, don't know. But what can finance do in regards to some of the talent challenges out there? What's the role that finance might play?
Yeah, I'll just relate an interesting anecdote, Jack. So when this year started, so our fiscal year moves from June to the end of May. So we're almost done actually with what we would call our fiscal year 22. And at the beginning of last year, in the summer of last year, I was asked to speak to a group of HR specialists, and they said, Efrain, tell us what the top 3 or 4 issues are going to be this year. And this was before we saw the real wave of resignation. And I said, look, managing, retaining, and recruiting talent is going to be number one at the top of the list. They looked at me and said, yeah, I can see that it's important. Not sure necessarily it would be number one. And as the year has gone on, it absolutely has proven to be the most important issue. Now, with respect to our clients, I'd say this, and then I want to talk a little bit about Paychex. With respect to our clients, we give them a suite of services and reports that helps them manage their retention. So we have turnover reports. We give them insights from our database on what's happening with respect to their employees and also other employees, employees of other clients within our base. So we're giving them a lot of data with which to manage. That's one thing. We're also providing information on wages within our base. We publish a monthly index that gives a sense of what's happening with employment, and also importantly, what's happening with wages. So you start to get a sense of what's happening in the market. We have a partnership with small businesses, but also small and medium-sized businesses with Indeed, which is the largest client board in the world, where clients can post their jobs and get resumes of qualified candidates. So we're doing a number of things to help our clients. On the Paychex side, managing, recruiting, and retaining has proven to be an important task this year. And I would say this: not surprisingly, I think if you talk to most CFOs, they'd say something similar, which is having a process and having a way to provide flexibility for employees has become paramount. Without providing that to employees, you have trouble even getting to the point where you can recruit them. So we have had to be very agile in terms of how we have structured work. We're much more remote than we used to be. We're more hybrid, I would say, than we were certainly a year and a half, 2 years ago, pre-pandemic. And we've had to pivot because that is where the workforce is right now. Will it stay that way? No one knows. But for now, that's become really, really important. And that's the way we have managed to address some of the challenges that we've had. I would say the other thing is what we've seen a trend is more of a trend towards people who are interested in part-time work. So that for our worksite employees, didn't see that as much, but it's becoming more important. There are people who simply left the workforce and don't want to come back full-time, but are willing to consider doing it on a part-time basis. And so we've adjusted our approach to be able to accommodate that.
Other finance leaders, we've asked how they are measuring their workforce stability. They'll tell us they keep a close eye on employee churn. They're looking at net new hires. Is there any other number, your metric you might add to that?
I'd say those are important, and I think the third, of course, is engagement. So we're launching a survey internally to make sure that the changes that we have implemented, including wage actions that we have taken, are hitting the mark and creating the right level of engagement. After all, we're both a technology business and also with an important service component. If our employees do not feel like they're well taken care of, it's difficult for them to take care of our clients, and that's an important way in which we add value in the company.
Just to touch on engagement with you, learning and development versus wages. Where can you rank these for us when you think of remedying engagement? What would your remedy be?
Well, I think you have to provide a competitive wage. If at the end of the day you offer enrichment, that's helpful, but there's a threshold you have to meet. But just had a conversation before we started this discussion with another colleague, and the reality is that employees are looking for a place where their talents and contributions are valued and where they can grow. You have to provide both of those, and you have to provide a competitive wage. And I think it's the combination of all three that are the balance. Clearly, wages are important, but I think they're a threshold consideration. The other two are very important. Am I working with a manager who cares about me and wants me to develop? And do I have opportunities to develop and grow within the company? If you cannot answer those questions, increasingly for people entering the workforce, you're simply not going to keep them. You're not going to get them candidly in the first place.
And you mentioned the managers. That relationship seems to be the key to unlocking retention. Am I overstating that? It seems, and I'm sure you're managing the company in such a way where those managers are aware that they're being watched closely. We need your help to make the workforce function and grow the way it should.
No, absolutely crucial. I would say that most people don't leave organizations, they leave managers. And I think in this environment, it's not enough to just simply be a neutral when an employee walks in the door. You have to work on ways to make sure that they feel that they're making a contribution and that that contribution is being valued. And the work of managers has never been more valuable than it is today, because it makes no sense to recruit someone into a company only to find that they can't work with the manager, and then you eventually have churn. The work is harder. I won't say that that it's necessarily easy to do, but I think it's never been more crucial than it is now.
We're going to jump to what we refer to as our finance strategic moment question. And this is where we're looking for an anecdote. And again, you've had so many of these along the way, Efrain. We're just looking for one that could share a story from your past that revealed how finance really, its lines of sight into the organization really plays a strategic role. Anything come to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
Well, Jack, it's interesting. So there's many I could think about, but it's more relevant to talk about things that are more recent. I would say the pandemic was, for many of us, a hugely important moment. I remember when we had to pivot on a dime about 2 years ago and send 95% of our employees to work remote. We had incredible amount of challenges in doing that, like many other organizations did, and they made it work. We did too. Um, but during that period, we were also in the process of attempting to report earnings, and we knew that rough times were ahead. And I saw the stock price decline pretty significantly. And a number of us got in a conference room, and we had a very, very vigorous debate about what we said. So there was a temptation to say nothing, just to basically say it's too uncertain. We can't provide an update, and as a consequence, this is what's happening right now, but we can't give you any sense of the future. The problem with that was we did have data, and we did have precedents, and we did have history. And so we had a very vigorous debate about whether to say something. That half the camp said say nothing. I was in the camp that said we need to say something, and we need to say what we know, and we need to say this is the limit of what we know. This is back, by the way, in April of 2020, when no one knew anything. And I said, we have the data compared to many of the other people in the market. And why don't we share what we know? And so my viewpoint was the one, or the group, I should say, that agreed with me was the viewpoint that prevailed. And we ended up having a very, very long analyst call, about 2 hours, as people were asking us. I would say about half the calls were really about the general economy and what we were seeing, because we had unique insight into employees, and we got tremendous we got tremendous value from that for being transparent. Now, we didn't get it completely right. We had to come back and revise some of the things we said, which we were one of the few companies that did that during the pandemic. But I learned a lesson about the value of transparency. And in that situation, telling people what you know and explaining what the limits of what you know generally gets you a lot of benefit and credit. And to this day, I think that we still get credit for having said what we said, having shared what we shared in a moment when people were very concerned about saying things, and we were able to navigate through the transition. Jack, it's interesting. We're having this conversation almost 2 years to the day when the worst of the COVID crisis hit. It's just hard to imagine what the world looked like then. A lot of uncertainty, but we managed through it with as much transparency as we could, and that worked well for us.
The business landscape is changing quickly. As the pressure to manage expenses efficiently and strategically increases, you need solutions that not only help drive down costs and improve efficiencies, but meet the changing needs of your business. At U.S. Bank, we can help. We'll work with you to uncover your specific payment challenges and bring you proactive and innovative solutions and strategies that help you meet the financial goals of your organization. Our commitment to doing the right thing for our customers has earned us the designation of one of the world's most ethical companies from the Ethisphere Institute for 6 years in a row. To learn more, visit us at usbpayment.com. We want to ask you to look back again, and we're thinking to your first 30 days, your first 60 days as a CFO at Bausch and Lomb. When you think about entering that role for the first time, we mentioned all the experience you've had, and you touched on a mentor or two. But what is the piece of advice, if you could go back in time and tell yourself something, you've taken on all that responsibility, what is the piece of advice you'd give yourself the first 30 days into that first CFO role?
I would say talk less and listen more. And I think that absorb as much information as you can. Be wary about expressing too many opinions. You simply don't know enough at that stage to be able to opine. I think people value when you listen to them, and I would be an even better listener. I try to do that, not always successful, but I think that listen as much as you can, try to understand as much as you can, talk as little as you can in that period of time, other than to add value where you think it's appropriate. But that is a period of intense learning, the proverbial drinking from a fire hose. You've got to go through that process and really learn, and then you'll be in a position to do the things that you think make sense.
Friend, we always like to ask our guests to reflect a little on the personal side for us. This is usually the toughest. It's either the toughest question or we just don't get the best answers. I don't know, but it's hard for finance people to reflect on themselves, and it's hard for all of us, I suppose. But is there something that sets you apart, a personal habit or something that you're known for, something a family member might say, "Oh, that's what Efrain, that's what he's known for." What would you tell us?
I have a lot of degrees. The thing that I learned in collecting all those degrees is that there's no end to knowledge. And I am an intensely curious person. I hope to keep learning something until the day I'm no longer here. I find learning exciting. And I think that the knowledge that I had last year is probably not going to be enough for this year. I need to learn new things. And so every year starts, I set a goal for myself around something important to learn. And I've got some lined up, haven't started the year, my next fiscal year yet. But I also think that learning comes from listening to your colleagues. There is so much that you can glean if you're willing to listen. So I'm intensely curious. I am fascinated by most subjects, and I find that it's amazing as you open your mind the things that can bear relevance to your business career. I think if you are well-rounded and you are a learner, you will do very well in business. And so that's what I would say most people would say about me.
Yeah, and we mentioned your law degree and your MBA, and as learners go. But you am I right? You went back for a doctorate in management along the
Yes, I
way as
did.
well, a
Yeah,
Case
yeah,
Western.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
haven't seen too many doctorates in management. But and again, that was in the midstream of your career. So either you're doing this at
Yes,
nights, part
yeah,
time. I don't know. It's that's
yeah,
someone who likes learning. So we've
yeah,
highlighted that
yeah,
part. Because
yeah.
it sets you apart for sure. Is there a book, or we always like to see if there's a book or something you escape with, or maybe it's a more of a business class book, whatever. Anything come to mind for us?
I would say early on in my career, I would say the most influential book I read was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It gave me a framework to understand how to be effective in a context. The second one I would say is, with great deference to Peter Drucker is a small, slim book called The Effective Executive. It's probably 110 pages. You can probably read it in a night. And it has one penetrating and sobering question to start the book. It says every executive has to ask one question: what is my unique contribution? And I think about that quite often whenever I'm in a new situation. What is my unique contribution in this situation? I go about trying to make it work. So two, I'd bookend earlier. The 7 Habits. It's probably fallen out of discussion these days, but I think what a great book. Stephen Covey, the late Stephen Covey, and then Peter Drucker, the giant of management thought in the 20th century. The Effective Executive, small book, really powerful thoughts.
Great. Well, thank you for those. And we are up to our final question, where we ask you to look forward finally. And what we want to know is, what are your priorities as a finance leader at Paychex for the next 12 months? What are the priorities for 12 months forward?
Well, I think many CFOs find themselves in somewhat of a similar situation than we do. So for those who navigated well through the pandemic, and I would consider us to be one of those companies, the question is, what's next? How do you plan a sustainable trajectory going forward? And that's really the next 12 months. What are the decisions we need to be making today so that in the next 12 months, we're on a sustainable growth trajectory? So, we've had a beautiful recovery, but we want to keep it going. If you haven't done well, the question is, how do you recover? So our thoughts are really focused on building that track record of continuing sustainable growth going forward, and lots of challenges, but lots of opportunities to make that happen too.
Efrain Rivera, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you very much, Jack. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Hello, listeners. Do us a favor. Be certain to subscribe to CFO Thought Leader on Apple Podcasts, or if you're an Android user, check us out on Spotify or Google Play. If you liked the show, please recommend it to a friend.